My name's Kieran. I'm 27, and this story starts with a smirk, my mother's. To be specific, the exact moment she leaned back in her seat, crossed her arms, and whispered to my aunt loud enough for the whole room to hear. Told you, he wanted nothing to do with him. That smug little chuckle of hers echoed in my ears more than anything else that day. The lawyer hadn't even finished reading the will, but she'd heard what she wanted to hear. My name wasn't mentioned. Not even once. Not in passing. Not a single cent. And as far as she was concerned, that was confirmation that she'd finally won. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, hands folded, eyes calm, and smiled. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the piece of paper they were reading from, that wasn't his will. Not really. Let me back up. My grandfather, Elliot, was the closest thing I ever had to a real parent. He raised me more than my own mother did. When I was 7, it was him who took me to school when my mom forgot. When I was 13, it was him who taught me how to fix a car engine, not because I needed to, but because he wanted me to have skills no one could take away. When I turned 18, he gave me a handwritten journal full of his life lessons, told me to travel, make mistakes, and come home with stories. And when I did, when I came back 5 years later after traveling abroad, with a degree in architecture and a quiet sense of peace, he was waiting. Older, slower, but still sharp as ever. Still Elliot. But that's not the version of him my mother saw. To her, he was a vault. Of money, of status, of property. Something to crack open. She used to joke at family dinners that she was just waiting for the old man to finally let go of the house keys. I never laughed. Neither did he. Our relationship, mine and hers, had always been strained. She was the kind of person who couldn't stand when the spotlight wasn't directly on her. Everything was about appearances, about who wore what to church, who got invited to what. I remember once, when I was 10, she screamed at me for crying in public because it made her look like a failure. Elliot didn't say anything that day, but later, when she left for one of her endless errands, he brought me a chocolate milkshake and told me, "Some people only know how to take. That doesn't mean you have to stop giving. It just means you give smarter." I think about that quote more than I probably should. So when Elliot fell ill, things got ugly fast. I flew home immediately, took leave from work, moved into his guest room to help care for him. He was in and out of the hospital with heart complications, but his mind was still sharp. We spent hours talking at night. Some days, he was too tired to speak, so I'd just sit there and read the newspaper out loud to him, knowing he hated the silence. And through it all, my mother circled like a vulture. She'd pop in with takeout and a fake smile, offer to help organize his finances, or make sure his estate was in order. It didn't take long to figure out what she was really after. He told me, plain as day, a few weeks before his last hospital stay, "I'm changing the will. Again. This time, I'm putting everything in your name." I told him he didn't have to, that I didn't want the money. He just nodded. "I know. That's why it's you." Then he slipped a small brass key into my hand. "Safe deposit box. Bank downtown. Don't open it until after. You'll know." I didn't know then what I know now, that 2 days later, after a bad episode with his heart, he'd be admitted to the hospital and never come back out. Or that my mother would show up with a lawyer and 2 witnesses and pressure him to sign a new will just in case. I wasn't allowed in the room. She told the nurses I was causing stress. I didn't even know what she'd done until after he passed, when she invited me. No, summoned me. To the will reading like it was some kind of victory parade. I should have known the moment I saw her outfit. Black, of course, but with jewelry loud enough to be seen from space, that she thought this day would be hers. And in a way it was. For a little while. Because when that lawyer, a man I didn't recognize, someone she clearly hired, read off that entire fake document, it painted a version of my grandfather that didn't exist. Someone bitter, cold, selective. He left everything to her. The house, the stocks, even the antique watch he used to polish every Sunday. The one he told me would be mine. No mention of me. Not even a post-it note. And that's when she laughed. That's when she leaned back in that stiff leather chair, her voice dripping with smugness, and said, "Told you. He wanted nothing to do with you." I didn't blink. I didn't ask for an explanation. I just said, "Thanks for the invite," stood up, and walked out. No fight. No dramatics. But the second I was in my car, I drove straight to the bank. The manager recognized me instantly. Elliot had taken me there with him years ago. He told us you might come by someday, the man said, handing me a form to sign. And then he brought out the box. Inside was a thick envelope labeled, in Elliot's handwriting, for Kieran. Only Kieran. It contained two things: the real will, signed, notarized, dated after the one they forced on him, and a flash drive. On it, a video. My grandfather, sitting up in his hospital bed, weak but focused. He looked straight into the camera and said, "If you're seeing this, it means your mother pulled exactly what I thought she would. But don't worry. You've got everything you need. Let the lawyers handle it. And don't feel bad. She made her choice. You made yours." I watched that video 4 times that night. The next morning, I contacted a real lawyer. One Elliot had already arranged to handle this mess, apparently. His name was Lawrence, and he was a quiet, calm man who said things like, "We've dealt with worse, and don't worry, she can't touch this." He told me not to say a word to anyone yet, to let her think she won. And so I did. For 2 weeks. I went silent, didn't return her calls, didn't answer texts from nosy cousins asking about the will. I kept my head down. Meanwhile, Lawrence prepared everything: the real will, the video statement, the motion to contest and void the forged will, and most importantly, the plan to make it very public. And that's where this story is headed, the moment it all explodes. Because tonight, there's a celebration dinner at my mom's house. She's invited the whole family. A little gathering to toast moving on and honoring Elliot's legacy, which, in her case, just means showing off her inheritance and rubbing it in everyone's face. She doesn't know I'm coming. She definitely doesn't know what I'm bringing. Let's just say, I won't be showing up empty-handed. And by the time dessert is served, every single guest will know exactly what she did. The air was heavy that evening, the kind of thick summer humidity that clings to your skin and makes even a breath feel like work. I pulled into the cul-de-sac a few minutes before the celebration dinner officially began and parked half a block away. Her driveway was already packed. There were at least 10 cars crammed up the curb, and more filtering in slowly. She really invited everyone. Cousins I hadn't seen since high school, family friends who had no real connection to Grandpa, but would never say no to free wine and catered appetizers. Typical. It wasn't grief. It was theater. I sat in the car for a few minutes, watching people stream inside through the open front door, carrying bottles of red or tins of store-bought cookies like this was Thanksgiving. I could already hear her laugh. Sharp, performative, rehearsed. The same one she used at networking events when someone mentioned money. It cut through the front window and stabbed something deep in my chest. But I didn't let it fester. I just reached into the passenger seat and picked up the manila envelope. Inside, the real will, notarized and stamped. A printed transcript of the video Grandpa recorded, the timeline of when it was signed, and copies of the medical records that proved, beyond any doubt, he was of sound mind when he made it. I debated whether to just let the lawyers handle it all quietly, but that decision was stolen from me the moment she made this dinner public. She wanted to parade around his memory like a trophy. Fine, let her. But I'd make sure everyone knew whose trophy it really was. I slipped the flash drive into my inside jacket pocket. I didn't bother with a tie. I wanted to look casual, not petty, not angry, not bitter, just calm. I'd read once that nothing unsettles a liar more than the person they wronged showing up with peace on their face. And I had peace. Cold, still peace. The kind that only comes when you already know the ending. I walked in through the front door without knocking. Her house was decked out in floral centerpieces and those weird fake candles that flicker with battery-powered dignity. The walls were filled with old photos of Grandpa, one she'd pulled from storage just for the night, trying to make herself look like the loving daughter. One giant print of him at the lake cabin sat above the fireplace, framed in gold. I had taken that photo. She never even asked. "Oh, look who decided to show," my Aunt Marilyn said as she passed by with a flute of champagne. "He lives." I gave her a polite nod and scanned the room. There she was, my mother, wearing a black dress far too tight for someone hosting a dinner in memory of her father, laughing with my cousin Dylan and some man in a blue blazer I didn't recognize. She hadn't seen me yet. Someone handed me a plate and asked if I'd tried the shrimp cocktail. I waved it away and stepped farther into the living room. Just then, she turned. "Oh," she said flatly, like I was a stray cat that wandered in from the street. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it," I replied, keeping my voice light. "I wasn't sure you'd want to be here," she said, sipping her wine. I mean, considering. Considering what? I tilted my head. She smiled tightly. Well, it can't be easy, knowing he you know. I waited. Let her dig. Left you out of the will, she said, louder this time, like she wanted everyone in a 10-foot radius to hear. He made his wishes clear. A few people nearby glanced over, pretending not to eavesdrop. I shrugged. Yeah, wills can be complicated, especially when there's more than one. The smile cracked. Just for a second. A flicker of unease passed over her eyes before she caught herself. Excuse me, she asked, still trying to keep the tone playful. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the envelope, and handed it to her without ceremony. Thought you might want to take a look. She frowned, clearly confused, and opened it. As she scanned the first page, I saw her mouth tighten. Her eyes flicked from the header to the signature. Her hand gripped the paper a little harder. This is a joke, she said softly, but there was no confidence in it. I didn't answer. She looked at the second page, the notarization, the date, the witness signatures. Then the medical note, signed by Dr. Hawthorne, confirming Grandpa's mental clarity. Then the video transcript. By the time she reached the part where he directly names me as the sole beneficiary, her hands were shaking. You forged this, she hissed under her breath, stepping closer to me. You, how dare you? I leaned in calmly. Don't bother. Lawrence already filed everything this morning. This is just a courtesy. You won't get away with this, she snapped, voice rising. Actually, I said, pulling the flash drive from my pocket. I think I already did. I nodded toward the TV on the wall, the same one they were using earlier to play some old slideshow set to Coldplay. Mind if I borrow the screen? It was Dylan who stepped up then, the cousin who had always been a bit of a tech nerd. Got a USB port right here, he said, already taking the flash drive from my hand. I didn't stop him. He plugged it in, scrolled through the folder, and found the file labeled to be played only if they lie. As the screen flickered and the video loaded, I finally turned to the room, to the aunts and uncles sipping wine, the cousins whispering to each other, the friends of the family who barely knew me but were about to get a front row seat to the truth. Before we eat, I said, I think it's only fair everyone hears what Grandpa really wanted. And then the screen lit up, and there he was. Grandpa Elliot, tired but composed, sitting up in that hospital bed, looking right into the camera with those sharp, unmistakable eyes. If you're seeing this, he began, then my daughter has done exactly what I feared she might. But don't worry, I wrote a new will. The real will. And it's legal, witnessed, and locked in a safe box. This is just to make sure no one gets confused. The room went dead silent. I watched her expression crumble in real time, from smug, to confused, to horrified. She glanced around, seeing every face turn toward her, mouths slowly falling open, wine glasses lowering in stunned disbelief. And the best part? He hadn't even gotten to the part about why he left it all to me. Grandpa's voice filled the room like a sermon from beyond the grave, steady, deliberate, with that distinct gravelly tone that always demanded attention. Even in a hospital gown, he had a presence. And right now, he had the whole room under his spell. If you're wondering why I left everything to Kieran, he said, folding his hands on his lap, it's simple. He showed up. When I needed help, he was there. When I couldn't breathe without a nurse present, he read the newspaper out loud because he knew I hated silence. He didn't ask me what he'd get. He didn't angle for a penny. He just showed up. My mother shifted her weight uncomfortably. A few eyes had already turned to her, slowly, almost involuntarily, like people weren't even trying to hide it anymore. I know this won't be popular, Grandpa continued, and here, his expression grew colder, almost sharper. Especially with you, Meredith. There it was. Her name. Clear as day. My mother flinched. But you've spent your whole life performing love and calling it loyalty. You show up when there's a spotlight, not when there's struggle. And when you brought in that lawyer and tried to get me to sign the papers you drafted, I let you. I signed them. Because I knew something you didn't. I knew they weren't the real ones. People were gasping now. One of my uncles actually muttered, "Oh my God," under his breath. I let you think you won. I needed to see how far you'd go. And now that I have, let me be clear, I changed my will, legally, after that stunt. Kieran inherits everything. The house, the land, the accounts, the stocks, the antiques. All of it. I heard a plate clink onto the floor in the dining room behind me. I'm not doing this to punish you. Grandpa said. I'm doing this because I want my legacy to go to someone who didn't treat me like an ATM with a pacemaker. I spent my life building this family, and Kieran is the only one who treated me like a human being in the end. You can be angry, you can scream, but you won't change it. The video ended abruptly there. No flourish, no goodbye, just a screen gone dark and a room too stunned to breathe. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was seismic. The kind of silence that hums behind your ears and makes you second-guess your own heartbeat. Everyone was looking at me now, or at her. My mother. Her face had gone pale. The wine glass she'd been holding was trembling in her hand like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "What is this?" she whispered, to no one in particular. "This isn't real. It can't be real." "Already verified," I said quietly. "Witnessed. Notarized. Filed this morning." She turned to me then, fully. And for the first time in years, I saw it. Not the woman who'd lectured me on posture in front of guests. Not the woman who'd once grounded me for crying after my dog passed away because it made her look weak. No, this version of my mother was something else entirely. This was a woman who'd bet everything on a lie and just watched the ground crack open beneath her heels. "You're doing this to humiliate me," she hissed. "No," I said, my voice flat. "You did that yourself. I'm just clearing the fog." Aunt Marilyn cleared her throat behind me. "Meredith," she said slowly, "is this true? You had him sign something while he was in the hospital?" My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. I watched her flounder, desperate to find an explanation, a defense, some narrative to spin. But there wasn't one. There never had been. All the control she thought she had, all the image managing, the fake smiles, the curated sympathy cards, gone. "What happens now?" my cousin Dylan asked, his voice hesitant. "I mean legally?" "Legally," I repeated. "The real will goes into probate. The forged one's being contested. And the lawyer who helped push it through, the one she hired, might want to contact a malpractice attorney." My mother recoiled like I'd slapped her. "How dare you?" she spat. I stepped forward. Just one step. "How dare I? After everything you did, you're still trying to be the victim? You used a dying man's weakness to try and grab everything he built. You told nurses I wasn't allowed to see him. You intercepted mail. You lied. I just gave everyone the truth." More murmurs now. Conversations forming in corners. Cousins whispering to spouses. My uncle with the bad knees stood up slowly and walked over to Grandpa's photo, staring at it like he was seeing the man for the first time. And in the middle of all of it, my mother stood frozen, trapped in a moment that she couldn't manipulate. I looked around the room. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't triumphant. I was just done. I turned toward the door and reached for my coat. "Where are you going?" someone asked. Maybe my aunt, maybe no one. "Home," I said. "I've got a lot to sort out. Lawyers, documents, properties. You know, all the things she thought were hers." And as I walked down the steps and out into the quiet dusk, I could hear her voice again, behind me, cracking through tears and rage, shouting my name like it still meant something. But I didn't turn around. I didn't look back as I stepped into the night. Her voice chased me down the steps, angry and trembling, but it bounced off me like rain on stone. I'd spent too many years trying to earn something that was never hers to give: approval, respect, a sense of belonging. That part of me had died with Grandpa. What remained was something quieter, colder, and much, much stronger. The days that followed moved in slow, deliberate waves. There were no fireworks, no final screaming matches. Just paperwork, lawyers, and consequences rolling in with the steadiness of a tide. On Monday morning, Lawrence filed the full motion to invalidate the forged will, attaching every page of documentation, the video testimony, and even the nurse's written statement confirming that Meredith, my mother, had aggressively pressured Grandpa into signing legal documents during a vulnerable moment. Her lawyer, the one she'd hired in secret and thought would just make things easier, tried to backpedal so hard he practically slipped. Claimed he had no idea Grandpa had mental clarity issues. Claimed he was just helping out as a favor. Didn't matter. The forged will was ruled invalid less than 2 weeks later. It was so clear, so egregiously timed, so carelessly thrown together, that the judge didn't even need a full hearing. Just a few quick testimonies, a couple of depositions, and boom, gone. The Real will stood. Grandpa's estate, every bit of it, was officially mine. And it was overwhelming. I thought I'd feel powerful when it happened, vindicated. But when I sat down in the quiet office at the bank to sign the documents and transfer ownership of the cabin, the lake house, the trust accounts, and even his vintage car collection, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Tired of the fight. Tired of the years I'd spent wondering why my mother couldn't see me the way Grandpa did. Tired of chasing peace through people who thrived on chaos. Lawrence, ever perceptive, waited until I finished signing the last document before sliding over one final envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "It's from Elliot," he said gently. "He left it with us under specific instruction to be delivered to you after the estate's official transfer." I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in Grandpa's familiar scrawl. "Kieran, don't waste time being bitter. Use what I left you to build, not to destroy. You've got your whole life ahead of you, and I want you to fill it with things that matter. Love someone good. Make something lasting. And never, ever let anyone tell you that your kindness was a weakness. It's the only thing that ever made you stronger than them." I sat there for a long time, staring at that note. When I left the office that day, I didn't go back to my apartment. I went to the lake house. It was quiet. Eerily so, the kind of silence that used to scare me as a kid, but now felt comforting. I stepped inside, dropped my bags, and wandered through the place. Everything was exactly as he left it. The fishing rod still by the back door. The old wool blanket still draped over the armchair. His slippers still tucked neatly by the hearth. I lit a fire that night and read his journal again. Page after page of hard-won lessons, small stories, and scribbled diagrams of weird contraptions he never got around to building. And somewhere around midnight, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sell anything. Not the house. Not the cabin. Not the watch. Not even the dusty old Chevrolet sitting in his garage that hadn't run since I was 16. Every piece of this legacy, his legacy, was going to stay intact. But I was going to put it to use. Over the next few months, I made some big moves. First, I turned the lake house into a nonprofit retreat for teens aging out of foster care. Grandpa had grown up in the system. Most people didn't know that. He always had a soft spot for kids who'd been dealt a rough hand early on, and I figured there was no better way to honor him than to offer them a place to breathe, to reset, and to feel, maybe for the first time, like they mattered. I used the trust fund to hire staff, counselors, maintenance, and even a few of Grandpa's old friends as mentors. The ones who still remembered his war stories and dry humor. The ones who showed up to his funeral not for the inheritance, but because they'd genuinely lost someone. And then there was the car, the beat-up '72 Chevy with the broken radio and rusted hood. I restored it, not because I needed a car, but because he'd started teaching me how to fix it when I was 13 and we never finished. It became a weekend project, something that gave me both peace and purpose. I'd talk to him while I worked, just out loud, like he was in the passenger seat. "Yeah, I finally learned how to flush the radiator. You were right, it's a pain." Some weekends, I drive it down to the farmer's market and just sit there, watching the water sparkle across the lake, the breeze rolling through the trees the same way it always had when I was a kid. Word eventually got around about what I'd done. Aunt Marilyn sent a card, handwritten, surprisingly, saying how proud Grandpa would have been and how sorry she was for staying silent so long. A few cousins reached out, offering to volunteer or donate to the retreat. Even Dylan sent a text. "Hey man, I didn't know the full story. That video blew my mind. You good?" And my mother? She vanished. Not literally. She still lived 2 cities over, still hosted brunches for the kind of friends who only stayed for mimosas and gossip. But in every way that mattered, she was gone. She stopped reaching out after the ruling. Didn't try to appeal it. Didn't try to apologize. She just disappeared into the shadow of her own failure. I found out later that she'd tried to refinance her house and was rejected because of the pending fraud investigation. Lawrence told me the DA had opened a quiet inquiry into the forged will and that if she kept pushing, charges would be filed. She didn't push. I didn't need revenge in the end. Not really. Watching her lose the one thing she valued most, control, was enough. She could keep her brunches and pearls and silent afternoons pretending none of this happened. Meanwhile, I'd taken everything she tried to steal and used it to build something real. One night, 6 months after the will reading, I was sitting on the cabin's front porch with a mug of coffee and a hoodie wrapped around my shoulders. The fire pit crackled softly nearby. It was early fall, the air sharp with the promise of winter. I heard a knock on the porch railing and looked up. It was Caleb, one of the boys staying at the retreat. 17, sharp as a tack, with more walls than a fortress and a way of speaking that always sounded like a dare. You said I could ask you anything, right? He asked. Sure, I nodded. He kicked at a leaf and glanced away. Why'd your grandpa leave you all this? I thought for a moment. Then I smiled. Because I didn't ask for it, I said. I just showed up. He nodded slowly, like he was still chewing on it, then sat beside me and stared out at the water. We didn't talk after that. We didn't need to. And in that quiet, as the stars blinked awake above us and the trees rustled like they were whispering secrets, I realized something I never thought I'd feel. I was home. Not because of the property, not because of the money, not even because of Grandpa, but because I had taken the ugliest, most broken moment of my life and turned it into something solid, something that mattered. And in the end, that was all he ever wanted.